Hello, humans. Today I want... Nope. Put that back on. Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here. This is a Civivi I recently picked up from House of Knives here in Canada. They're, at the time of filming, having a sale. I don't think they'll be having a sale at the time of release, but, you know, who knows? It's House of Knives. So this is a Civivi Mini Elementum. Civivi with their funny little lifetime warranty bit. Life of the product or until it is confiscated by the TSA or ballpark security. Some people find creative ways to damage their knives, yada yada yada. This gives you cancer if you live in California. Makes your balls not work, which, I mean, it's California. Apparently your balls stop working there no matter what you do. Sharpened cutting edge. I like how they don't say it's sharp, they just say it's been sharpened. Inappropriate usage may result in injury. Appropriate usage may result in injury as well. Please keep blade away from fingers and body. Keep out of reach of children. Alright, nothing too imaginative there. Like we can see, this is a Mini Elementum, black hand-rubbed copper version. Alright, let's pop this guy open. Ooh, okay, so we do get a little keyring with it. If this was a Victorinox, they would count this as an individual function. And the fucking foam is glue. You have a perfectly recyclable cardboard box, and then you glue the fucking foam insert into it. Most places, you can't recycle the foam insert. So unless you're keeping this as a presentation piece, all this means is, one, I have to fight with the fucking foam, which is probably glued down well, which means it's going to rip and tear, which is a fucking pain in the ass. Or, I give up and I throw this whole thing away. This is recyclable. Or burnable, or whatever, if it wasn't for the fucking foam. Just give us removable foam. Anyway. No Civivi information packet or anything like that. That's kind of interesting. A lot of these come with like a little booklet or warranty info or whatever, but in this case we just get a little box. And inside of the tiniest dog poo bag Civivi has ever made, here we have our Elementum Mini. That is kind of snappy. Very clicky. Alright. That's got a surprisingly good D10 for a knife this small. Alright. So, before I get into all of my new blade testing and so on and so forth, I'm going to talk a little bit about philosophy. Not grand philosophy, but miniature philosophy. So, when you talk about, like, designing knives, there's a couple of different ways, generally speaking, of doing it. Small knives, specifically. You have designing something from the ground up. This is a buck 425. This is designed from the ground up to be a small knife. A lot of thought went into how to make this the best for the given size class, right? You know you're going to make a small knife, so you design around that. The same thing can be said with something like the Kershaw capsule. They knew that they were making a small knife, so they designed it specifically to be a small knife. Another design philosophy is when you take a larger knife and you sort of scale down the idea of it. So you know you want to make a small knife, but you don't know necessarily exactly what that's going to look like. You just want it to feel like the larger version of it. A famous example of this would be the smaller Opinel knives. I actually don't have one in hand, but the smaller Opinel knives tend to be like this. And then you have stuff like the Micro Recon, which is a cold steel product, where they take the full-size Recon, which is a very good knife, and they take the design aesthetic and the philosophy behind it, and they scale it down, and they figure out how to make it work in a small package. So this has the same design ideas, but it does not have the same profile. It doesn't look identical. Then we have the third way of making a miniature knife. The third way of making a miniature knife is just take the big one and scale it down. And that is basically what you get with the Mini Elementum. Is it mini or micro? Mini. With the Mini Elementum. Right? This has all of the same lines as the bigger brother. The only difference, this is a frame lock instead of a liner lock. But other than that, this is just an Elementum 1 sized down by like half. Not quite, but very close to half. The only real difference that they do make is this doesn't have a pocket clip, and this is a frame lock instead of a liner lock. And a big part of the reason why this is going to be a frame lock instead of a liner lock is on a knife this small, thickness starts to play a very big role. You can actually tell, is it a copper accent or is that just colored differently? You can tell there is a liner behind the copper piece on the front side, but putting a liner in this would make it a significant amount thicker. This is a thin knife. As a result of being completely scaled down, in order to keep it being comfortable, you have to figure out how to get around the liner. And the way that they've decided to do this is by making it a frame lock instead of having two slabs of material here, which honestly makes a lot of sense. If you tried to scale the liners down, like this is, I don't know. Yeah, like it's a full scale and liner thinner than the full-size Civivi elementum, right? Which means that if you had a liner that was this small, it would be a very, very weak liner. So the lock face would be very weak. So this is how you get a little bit of extra strength while still remaining very comfortable. The other design change is on the front, you have no screw hardware. You just have this pass-through screw with this rear barrel. And then on the back, you only have 2 screws for the entire construction of this thing. Whereas with the full-size version, you can see we have 3 screws plus the pocket clip screws. So there are a couple of little design differences, but really and truly, in aesthetics, they just scaled down the full-sized Civivi elementum. It is still a hollow grind, which is nice. There are some more, like, finishing touches. Both the blade and the handle are hand-rubbed satin finish with a horizontal grain, which is really nice looking. I haven't actually owned a horizontal grain before, and I gotta say, I dig it. It's pretty damn sweet. Whoa, that's snappy. That just about bit me. Did it bite me? It did not bite me. Okay, that's good. The flipper tab is very small, and because of the fact that this is a frame lock and the frame is so long, like the frame lock is so long, it's actually kind of difficult to keep your fingertips off of the frame lock. But you can kind of get around that by like putting. I'm getting around it basically by just pinching the back. I imagine you could also get around it by putting your middle finger on the back side of the pivot. Yeah, that works out pretty well. Alright. This thing is pretty. What is the blade steel? I think it's 12C27. Does it say? 14C28N. Okay, so it's not 12C. It's 14C28N. That's actually pretty good. I think that's arguably a better blade steel than the base version of the full-sized elementum, which is kind of funny to me. We do have, for our mounting hardware, just a ring, so you can put this on a pair of keys or something like that. I do think that is a pretty reasonable use case for this, to be honest. I mean, just for size comparison, let's, it's slightly longer than a 58mm Victorinox, right? Which is not a big knife. Like, that's a pretty reasonably sized knife to have on your keychain, so that's not too bad. Alright. Let's get into our new blade checks. Oh, wow. Yeah, no, that is incredibly consistent all the way to the edge. Very glassy feeling, which typically means that it has a high polish finish. For our paper cut, oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, this has a very sharp, this has a very, very sharp edge right down to the tip, which you can expect from Civivi. I mean, obviously at this point this is a little bit of an older model, but Civivi does do a very good edge. Let's do our puncture test. This is a hollow ground knife, but it's not a very, like, it's a very thin blade stock as well, so I cannot imagine we're going to have any problems with the puncture test. Yeah, that just sinks in there. I mean, it doesn't go very deep, but that's just because it's not a very big blade. Like, that takes no effort at all. Hollow grind gets really thin behind the tip, puncturing beautifully. For a knife this small, puncturing good is going to be very important. I mean, this is something you can expect people to have on their keychain, so they're using it to open up their Amazon packages, they're using it to open up, like, bags of chips, food packages at work, all of the little things. So it is important that you get a good puncture. And then our slicing test, it might have a hard time. Cutting through rubber and stuff like that tends to be a little bit harder with hollow ground blades. But let's find out. Oh yeah, no, that's actually beautiful. Yeah, no. I am getting zero shouldering. It is slicing right through that like a dream. One thing I am going to say about the hand rub satin finish, I don't think that this is going to be a finish that lasts very long, especially with use. I think it's going to get scratched up pretty good because all of the satin lines go horizontal down the blade. Any vertical lines that you get from cutting through material, especially if it's like slightly dirty, like if you cut through cardboard, for example, that's been outside and has a little bit of dirt on it, I think that the vertical lines on this are going to show up very quickly and very obviously, which is a little bit unfortunate. My initial feelings on like the lock bar access in particular, it's not bad. It's easy to access the lock bar. It's kind of difficult to get your fingers out of the way of the lock. But it is nicely scalloped on both sides on the inside, which means that I'm basically just pushing my thumb in and then moving it to the side. Is this running? Yeah, this is running on bearings. It's not quite like free moving on the bearings. I just don't think that the blade has enough mass for that, but it flicks open really well. And my hand, I mean, I'm kind of cramped in order to do this, but it is adapting to the movement very readily. I have a 2.5 finger grip on this knife. Absolutely no more. There is no choke up spot. This is a very small knife. But you know what? For light duty tasks, I don't think that this is going to be a problem, really. I think it's a beautiful looking knife. Like, I love that black with the satin copper. I adore copper. And then couple that in with that nice hand rub satin blade. This is, in my opinion, a very, very nice looking knife. And then on the back side, we also have hand rub satin for the lock side. I generally don't like frame locks because of this, like, one side, the show side's very pretty and the non-show side tends to be a little bit uglier. But because of the amount of effort that they went to still get that nice gray hand rub satin in there, I actually think this is a really nice looking little knife. Flipper tab, like I said, nice and easy. There's a couple jimping on the flipper tab, but there's no other jimping on this knife. I'm obviously going to use this. I'm going to put it in part of my rotation for a couple of weeks and come back with fuller thoughts. But I'm surprisingly excited. I do like little blades. I think that they're pretty fun. But yeah, we're going to see how this goes. I will be back now. And we are back. So I've been playing with this guy on and off for about 2.5 weeks now. More in my pocket than out of it. And I have to say, I am quite impressed. For such a small blade, 14C28N plus a hollow grind has done wonders to make this thing a little bit of a slicing champion. And I have a lot of thoughts in terms of like performance and what they did design-wise. But before I get into any of that, I do want to go over the design differences, all of them that I kind of noticed with the full-sized Civivi elementum. Okay, so start off with full-size Civivi elementum has a backstop, a stationary backstop in its regular position, and a shouldered blade. In comparison, the mini elementum actually has recesses cut out on both sides of the frame for a stop pin that is attached to the blade, which isn't a huge difference by any means, but does help to reduce the amount of overall hardware in this. Also to that effect, the mini elementum only has 2 screws holding the entire construction together. We have this back screw right here, just in front of the lanyard hole or keyring hole, and then we have the pivot screw. In comparison, the full-size Chevalier has 2 barrel spacers back here to provide strength to the construction, and the pivot screw. And then, of course, you know, your stop pin, which is going to add some rigidity and a couple of other things. But they're mostly just, you know, 1 extra screw there. Obviously, the mini version does not have a pocket clip, and it is a frame lock rather than a liner lock. So, very minimal design changes. All of the other lines seem to be very, very close. The actual lanyard hole is moved a little bit on the design. It's a little bit closer to the tail, whereas with the full-size version, it's a little bit more towards the spine, but that's pretty minimal. overall, the design is actually incredibly similar between the two. But yeah, that's about all I noticed in changes from the big one to the small one. So, carrying this thing. Action. Really good. What I will say for a lot, especially small frame locks like this, it can be very difficult to manipulate them because you want to avoid putting pressure on the lock bar when you open it. I found this one here to be pretty good. Overall, the lock bar isn't very tall, like it doesn't take up too much space, so it's not difficult to find purchase, coupled with the fact that despite the fact that it is a good strong detent, you can actually hear it there. Despite the fact that it is a good strong detent, it's not actually difficult to flip. The flipper tab position seems to be in a really good spot, and despite the fact that it is a little bit sharp for a push button, and I flipped it because I was putting pressure on the lock bar, for a light switch, it's very easy to do, and not something that I failed regularly. Same token for disengaging the lock, you have to be a little bit intentional with where you put your fingers, just in order to keep them off of that lock bar, but once you get used to it, it's really not too bad. In terms of a very small knife like this, I'm never going to advocate for a frame lock on a knife this size. I generally think that if you want this style of locking mechanism, a liner lock is a better choice, just across the board. That being said, I do feel like this was a good execution of a suboptimal decision. Its access is pretty good. You can see it's fairly well scalloped out on the inside, and tension isn't too bad. There's no over travel stop, which means you could, in theory, bend this out over time, but honestly, I think you'd have a hard time getting enough leverage on the knife to bend out the lock bar unintentionally. It can be actually somewhat difficult to disengage the lock, and it is quite difficult to bend it any further than this, unless I'm like grabbing with one hand and bending with the other, which is just dumb. In terms of use, you can actually see a little bit, especially on the handles where it was bouncing around in my pocket. Those really nice hand satin finished, hand rubbed finish does end up getting scratched up pretty good. It doesn't last very long, especially on the softer scale material. This one here is copper. I believe the other one is brass, and I believe those are the only versions currently at least available. And it does mar up pretty easily, so that is worth considering. It's not going to stay absolutely pristine forever. That being said, I still think it looks pretty good. I don't see any visible issue with it throughout the time that I've spent with it. It slices beautifully. I mean, the blade stock is so freaking thin, right? Like, it's such a thin blade. It's hollow ground. It's a whisper behind the edge. And the heat treatment does seem to be really well done. 14C28N is a great all-around steel, especially in the budget category, which at $66 this very comfortably is. That is 66 Canadian dollars, equivalent of like 40, 38, somewhere in there USD. I'm doing that math in my head and it's probably wrong, but it's comfortably under 45 bucks USD. So $66 Canadian, in my opinion, perfectly reasonable. I didn't put it on my keys, but being on your keys will mar it up much faster, just because then it's bouncing up against other metal objects all the time instead of just sitting at the bottom of my pocket, which, for whatever that is worth. In terms of ergonomics, I mean, it's 2.5 fingers. You're not getting a particularly good grip on this. I didn't do too much like whittling. I did a little bit, but not too much whittling or anything like that with it, just because it's uncomfortable to hold for that long. But that's not really what this is about. And I did process, because I use this as my dedicated knife, right? This was the knife that I had on me, which meant that if I had to process cardboard at work, I was processing cardboard at work with this. When I had to cut straps at work, it was with this. When I was cutting baler's twine, when I was stripping off bales for the cows, this is what was in my pocket, this is what I used. And you know what? It handled everything I asked it to do very comfortably, with no problem. So despite the fact that it is a very minimal grip, which can be a little bit uncomfortable for like prolonged or harder use cases, I didn't find anything in my day-to-day that had this knife made particularly more difficult. Don't get me wrong, it didn't make things easy for me either, but it wasn't a pain in the ass to use, is what I'm saying. Alright, let's do some size comparisons real quick. I know I compared it to the Victorinox Classic XD in the unboxing part of this video, but We're going to do my regular size comparison. So here it is next to a Civivi Chevalier. That was a terrible flip. And a Wee Knives Banter. As you can see, it is significantly smaller than either. Duh. I actually don't... Oh, it's ever so slightly longer than the handle on the Chevalier. Which means it's a good deal longer than the handle on the Banter, but... And here it is next to a Buck 110. It looks miniature. And a Zippo lighter. So as you can see, the handle is ever so slightly longer than a Zippo, but really and truly not by a lot. In terms of our thickness, this isn't even, it's going to be slightly thicker than half. Not even. This is exactly, I believe, half as thick. Oh, maybe it's a touch more. But it's right around half as thick as the Buck 110. Which makes sense. I mean, it is a very small knife. It shouldn't be particularly thick. Let's check our thickness. Oh, wow. It's even, like, quite a bit thinner than the Zippo, which I think is pretty funny. Yeah, this is a slim object. There's absolutely no denying that. In terms of our blade stock thickness, keep in mind it is hollow ground. Okay, I guess we're doing millimeters first. Okay, so like, yeah, 2.15 millimeters. Okay, inch. It's like 85 thousandths of an inch. That is very thin. That's like slip joint territory thin. Which does make sense. It's a very, very small knife. Being very, very thin does help with the slicing capability. So, you know what? Yeah. And you're never going to generate enough force with a knife this size. I shouldn't say never. There is no reasonable way that somebody would generate enough force with a knife of this size to damage it. This thing's defense against damage is genuinely just the fact that it is so damn tiny. Let's do a hardware check. I'm fairly confident it's going to be T6 in the back, but who's to say? Okay, so this is T8. Yeah, so the pivot is definitely a T8. And that body screw is going to be a T6. Yeah, so body screws a T6. In a knife this size, that makes a lot of sense. I obviously wouldn't mind seeing bigger, but, you know, what difference is it going to make? I didn't have to adjust this at all throughout my time using it, and it remains perfectly centered. Yeah, so overall thoughts and opinions on this thing. It's fairly heavy for its shape. A big part of that is essentially an unmilled copper front scale. There's no weight reduction in this thing at all. Full steel back scale, frame, whatever. So this is fairly heavy for its size, but that's the operative term, for its size. It's so small that despite being heavy, it's very light, which means it's very easy to carry, easy to use. I found absolutely no problem with this. Fits extremely comfortably into a fifth pocket. In almost all of my pairs of jeans, I can literally fit this next to my Zippo in my fifth pocket. Which, in terms of a carry experience, like super, super simple, absolutely not a problem. I don't think there's many people who need a knife this size. I mean, if you're somebody who uses a knife exceptionally... My girlfriend's over there in my... We're going to call this an office space right now. She just raised her hand. She's stealing this from me as soon as the review is done. I'm well aware of that. There's a very good chance I'm actually going to get myself the brass-fronted version of this fairly soon. But she has wanted this literally since the unboxing, so she is going to get it. That is not a problem for me at all. And yeah, for a little knife that sits in a keychain, in a purse, in a wallet, something like that, this is pretty good. If you don't need to do a lot with a knife other than maybe open some plastic packaging or like food containers, maybe cut down a cardboard box or something, this is really acceptable. 14C28N, pretty well the best deal you're going to see in this price point. Civivi's heat treatment on it is very, very good. It's very, very pretty. And it is comfortable. It's comfortable to manipulate. It's comfortable to use for a knife this size. The only other way of getting something this size really and truly to be comfortable is something like this, which is significantly taller, right? Like this takes up the 5th pocket all on its own, which is fine. But the end result is this is genuinely really nice for that use case. Now, in that specific use case where you want just a knife for your keychain, I think that this is highly recommendable. I don't think there's a lot of other situations where this is the right tool for the job, but it is at least worth considering if you're looking for something in this like 2-inch size range. There it is. I forgot to do blade length. Blade length is, from the front of the scale to the end of the blade is like 1 7/8, which means that from the sharpened edge to the end is like 1 3/4. So yeah, small knife, definitely a small knife. For being a small knife, it is quite comfortable. I think that the only change I personally would want to see, I don't even know if I'd want a pocket clip. That would be like the one thing I would consider, is some type of a pocket clip situation for it. But honestly, it's so small, there's no real point. Like, I think that for what it sets out to do, this does a phenomenal job. I do think it's ridiculous though. But yeah, I'm quite fond of this. My girlfriend's gonna get it. She's quite fond of it. I haven't handed this to anybody who's had a hard time manipulating it, even people with much larger hands than me. Yeah, I think it's cool. So it's weird, don't get me wrong, and I don't think that there's a lot of people who are seeking this specifically, but for a sub 2-inch blade, it's damn good. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.